Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me introduce myself. My name is Nindi Hastia Ningrum. I'm from Group 1. I would like to continue our materials about intercultural communication. Intercultural communication is the study and practice of communication across cultural contexts. Since communication is the mutual creation of meaning and culture is the coordination of meaning and action in a group, it follows that intercultural communication is the mutual creation of meaning across cultures. It means that intercultural communication is the mechanism whereby people of different groups perceive and try to make sense of one another. While there is no guarantee that people will be respectful of the differences they encounter in this process, it is certainly a criterion of good communication that people seek to understand the intention of each other in non-evaluative ways. Intercultural communication incorporates particular strategies that encourages us to attribute equal humanity and complexity to people who are not part of our group. The next part is tactical goal of intercultural communication. The first one is to inform one-way cultural adaptations in situations such as teaching in multicultural classroom, and the second, providing social service or including policing in multicultural communities, and the last, traveling for business or pleasure and some kinds of international study. A more substantial practical goal of intercultural communication is to contribute to the success of cross-cultural projects, such as transferring knowledge, conducting long-term business, or effecting change through community development projects. In these cases, more people involved in the cross-cultural encounter need to make adaptations toward one another in order to coordinate meaning and action adequately. When intercultural adaptation is two-way or mutual, it tends to create third cultures, in which two or more cultural patterns of coordination are themselves coordinated. Third cultures are virtual conditions that come into existence for the purpose of intercultural communication and then dissolve when that communication is not active. Okay, I think that's all for my explanation. The next presentation will be explained by Novanto Akbar.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Novanto Akbar, and here I will be the third presenter. So the subtopic that I would like to explain here, there are two subtopics that I will explain. They are component of communication, and then the other one is characteristics of communication. So let's go for the first subtopic. Okay. The first subtopic is component of communication. There are the component of communication can be broken down into several essential elements or components, and there are 8 components which serve an integral function in the overall process. There are source, and then message, third is channel, the fourth is receiver, the fifth is feedback, the sixth is environment, the seventh is context, and the last one is interference. For the first one, source. The source imagines, creates, and sends the message. The source encodes the message by choosing just the right order or the best word to convey by intended meaning, and presents or sends the information to the audience. By watching for the audience reaction, the source perceives how well they receive the message and responds with clarification or supporting information. And for the second element for the concept of communication is the message. The message is the stimulus or meaning produced by the source for the receiver or audience by McLean et in 2005. The message brings together words to convey meaning, but it also about how it is conveyed through nonverbal cues, organization, grammar, style, and other elements. The third element is channel. Channel is the way in which a message or messages travel between source and receiver. McLean 2005. Spoken channel include face-to-face conversation, speeches, phone conversation, and voicemail message, radio public address system, and Skype, or even uh, like other app. Written channel include letter, memorandum, purchase order, invoices, newspaper and magazine articles, blogs, email, text messages, tweets, and so forth. The fourth one is receiver. The receiver receives the message for the source analyzing and interpreting the message in way both intended and unintended by the source by McLean in 2005. The fifth concept of communication is there's a feedback. When you respond to the source intentionally or intentionally, you're giving feedback. Feedback is composed of messages the receiver sends back to the source. It is verbal or nonverbal. All of these feedback signal allow the source to see how well, how accurately, or how poorly and inaccurately the message was received. Leavitt and Muller in 1951. The sixth element or the sixth component of communication is the environment. The environment is the atmosphere, physical and psychological, where you send and receive messages. Michelin, 2005. Surroundings, people, animals, technology can all influence your communication, of course. And the seventh is about the context. The context of the communication interaction involved the setting scene and expectation of the individual involved by McLean 2005. A professional communication context may involve business suits, environment cues that directly or indirectly influence expectation of language and behavior among the participants. And the last component of communication is about interference. Interference, also called noise, can come from any source. Interference is anything that blocks or changes the source intended meaning of the message. McLean and in 2005. This can be external or internal psychological. Uh, the noise interferes with normal encoding and decoding of the message carried by the channel between source and the receiver. So it is all about the component of the communication. Let us go to next subtopic. Okay, the next subtopic is about characteristics of communication. So as you can see here, there are about 12 characteristics of communication. So because there are too much of characteristics, so I will just explain about the outline of each characteristic. Okay, the first characteristic of communication is that communication involves at least two persons. Communication involves at least two persons. It is about the sender and the receiver. The sender sends the message and is known as the communicator, and then the receiver receives the message and it is known as communicate between the sender and the receiver. It is known as communicate. The second characteristic is that communication is a two-way process. It doesn't merely mean sending and receiving messages. It is not complete unless and until the message has been understood by the receiver in the same sense. The third characteristic of communication is the purpose of the communication. Message is a must. Message is a subject matter of communication. Example, the content of the letter or speech or order, instruction, and or suggestion. Communication must convey some message. If there's no message, there's no communication. The basic purpose of communication is to create an understanding. And also the receiver should understand the message sent and should respond accordingly. The fourth characteristic of communication is the form of communication. Communication may take several forms. For example, order, instruction, report, queries, etc. The form it may be verbal or written. It may be formal or informal. The fifth characteristic is scope of communication. Communication pervades all human relationships. It is essential in all types of organizational and at all levels of management. The sixth characteristic is that communication is a dynamic process. Communication is influenced by the mood and thinking of the sender and the receiver. The way a message is accepted depends uh, upon the fact that which of the fine sensory organs of the receiver is active at the time. The seventh characteristic is that communication is much more than words. Communication is not merely sending or receiving facts expressed in words, etc. Communication may be written, oral, or gestural. It also involves ideas and emotions. A lot of communication is done through signs, symbols, and gestures. The eighth characteristic is about the communication's primary purpose is to motivate a response. The primary purpose of communication is to motivate the response or influence human behavior. There is no doubt that motivation comes from within, but communicator can also motivate people by good drafting on or message, proper timing of communication, and etc. To create understanding, communication should be relevant to this situation. It must always be remembered that communication is a mean of motivating and not an end itself. The next characteristic of communication, I mean the ninth, is about the communication is conversational. Communication sets up a link between facts, ideas, and thus helps the communicator and communicates to progress logically. The 10 is communication is an interdisciplinary science. Communication to be effective derives knowledge from several sciences like anthropology, sociology, and psychology, etc. And the 11, communication may be formal or informal, as I mentioned before in the previous characteristic. Formal communication follows the formal channel provided in the organization structure. For example, the managing director communicates with the departmental heads, say finance manager. Finance manager communicates to finance manager, deputy finance manager with accounts officer, and so on. So, in simple words, uh, in informal communication, there is no direct communication between the managing director and the accounts clerks. For informal communication, flows from informal channels of communication which are not provided in the organization structure. These channels set develop among members because of personal contact through working with each other. And then the last characteristic of communication is that it flows up and down and also from side to side. Communication flows downward from a superior to subordinate and upward from a subordinate to a superior. It also flows between two or more persons operating at the same level of authority. So, I think that is all about my presentation. I hope you will understand what I have said before. Thank you very much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.